On November 19th, 2025, the European Commission unveiled what it's calling the Digital Omnibus package. Now, this isn't just a minor update. We're talking about a sweeping proposal designed to fundamentally recalibrate the entire digital rulebook of the European Union. It marks a really significant strategic pivot in how Europe approaches technology regulation.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the EU's established regulatory identity, what we'll call its digital fortress. Then, we'll examine the pressures that prompted this big shift. After that, we'll dig into the details, the new timeline for the AI Act, the critical reforms to data and privacy rules, and finally, we'll conclude by assessing the fundamental choice Europe now faces.
To really appreciate why this shift is such a big deal, we have to start with the status quo. For years, the European Union has positioned itself as the world's leading digital regulator, building what you could almost describe as a fortress of rules to protect its citizens.
And the cornerstone of this fortress? Well, it has to be the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. It's a landmark framework built on the principles of personal autonomy and human dignity, and it grants individuals unprecedented control over their data, including that well-known right to be forgotten.
This protective philosophy continued right on through to the recently adopted AI Act. You can think of it as another high wall in that fortress, meticulously classifying AI systems by their potential risk and imposing very stringent requirements on those deemed high risk to safeguard fundamental rights and safety.
But here's the thing about a fortress-like approach. It created a powerful counterpressure. A growing chorus of voices began to ask a critical question. Was Europe's intense focus on protection coming at the expense of innovation and economic strength?
This very sentiment, captured perfectly by EU Economy Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis, really crystallized the debate. Influential reports, like one from former Prime Minister Mario Draghi, warned that Europe was falling behind the United States and China in key technologies. Suddenly, the conversation was framed squarely around the need for greater competitiveness.
In response, the central goal became simplification. The Commission set some ambitious targets to cut the red tape tied to its digital laws, a reduction of at least 25% in administrative burden for all companies, and even steeper 35% for the small and medium-sized enterprises that form the backbone of the European economy. So the problem was perceived in these terms. A high, complex regulatory burden was seen as a primary factor contributing to a slower pace of technological innovation when compared to global rivals. The Digital Omnibus was conceived as the tool to rebalance this very equation.
And here is where we see how the Omnibus begins to directly address this dilemma. Its first and arguably most impactful change is a complete overhaul of the AI Act's implementation timeline.
Instead of rigid, fixed calendar dates, the proposal introduces a much more flexible, condition-based trigger. The demanding rules for high-risk AI systems will now only come into force once the crucial harmonized technical standards and official guidelines are actually published and available for businesses to use.
Now, to prevent this from becoming an indefinite delay, the Commission has set absolute backstop dates. For high-risk systems used in areas like employment and education, the deadline is pushed to December 2027. For those in regulated products like medical devices, it's August 2028. This amounts to a pretty significant extension, up to 16 months for some systems.
The scope of the Omnibus, however, reaches far beyond just the AI Act. It also proposes some of the most significant changes to the GDPR and other data rules since they were created, all in the name of fostering innovation.
Among the most debated of these changes is the proposal to explicitly make legitimate interest a valid legal basis for processing personal data to train AI models. The goal is to give European AI startups legal certainty and access to the vast data sets they need to compete, without the near impossible task of getting explicit consent from millions of individuals. So let's be really clear about this. It fundamentally shifts the burden. Under the consent model, your data is protected by default until you opt in. Under this new model, data can be processed by default, and the responsibility falls on you, the individual, to actively object or opt out. And this really illustrates the wider ambition of the Omnibus. It's a whole cascade of simplifications. It creates a single portal for reporting cybersecurity incidents, it consolidates scattered data laws, it aims to end cookie fatigue by letting users set their preferences once in their browser, and it provides a clear legal basis for companies to use sensitive data for the essential task of correcting bias in their AI systems.
All of these changes, the delays, the legal clarifications, the simplifications, they bring us to the central question. What is the ultimate trade-off here? Europe is standing at a crossroads, forced to weigh its drive for innovation against its very deep commitment to protection.
The promise from the European Commission is clear and quantifiable. They project these measures will save businesses up to €5 billion in administrative costs by 2029, fostering a more dynamic and competitive digital single market.
But civil society groups see a very different outcome. Networks like European Digital Rights have labeled the proposal a massive rollback, and they're warning that it could dismantle the very foundations of the EU's globally respected model for human rights in technology policy. This is the fundamental conflict. On one side, you have the promise of competitiveness, billions in savings, legal certainty for AI developers, and unlocked data for innovation. On the other, the perceived peril, weakened privacy standards, unchecked AI risks during the extended delays, and a shift of the protective burden onto individual users, potentially allowing for what critics call the unchecked use of people's most intimate data.
The proposal now moves to the European Parliament and the Council for debate. In essence, the digital omnibus represents a deliberate pivot from a philosophy of protection first to one that seeks a new equilibrium with innovation. This leaves us with a critical question to consider. Has Europe found the right balance, or does this represent a compromise that goes too far?